What is going on, YouTube? Hope you guys are doing fantastic today. We got the SPL God tier list now going into the fall phase. We're going to be ranking gods, kind of what I think, how I think the SPL players are going to value them, and just overall, just how I think they're going to be valued over the rest of the year, unless some major buffs or nerfs shake up the rest of the things. Yeah, let's just jump right in. Starting with Achilles. Achilles is in a fine spot. He counters some of the top-end gods. He's got a really good matchup into Arthur. He's got a solid matchup into Cucullin. So I do expect a little bit of Achilles. I think he's a pretty much A-tier god. He's not something you top pick. He's something you kind of counter pick with because he does have a lot of bad matchups. But if you can avoid those bad matchups, he has some really good matchups too. Agni, I don't expect a single Agni pick. I think Agni's in a really poor spot for SPL. He has really exploitable weaknesses, not great laning phase, not great mid game. He's really easy to pick. He doesn't do camps very well. He doesn't 2v2 that well. Everything about Agni is just pretty mid. Agni, C tier. I'm losing Cobb. He did get a pretty decent nerf last patch, but I still don't think it's enough to kind of hit what is strong about him. He's still going to be a very good laning phase god. He's going to win most mid matchups. He's going to win most 2v2s in duo. Even if he doesn't scale as good as other ADCs, he doesn't need to. He does what he needs to do. He lanes well. His items are OP right now. A tier god. I should see a lot of value in AMC and mid lane. Opwash, same thing as Agni. Too exploitable. Very bad weaknesses. I could see him being picked in like the bottom half of a draft as like a counter pick or something. Maybe somebody has a full heal comp and Opwash gets value there. But again, too exploitable. His build path is pretty meh right now. Maybe you could see something weird coming out with like an Opwash build where he goes Warlocks into like a Manticore or something like that, where he's just super tanky and hard to deal with. I don't really see a world where Opwash is going to be played. Amaterasu. We saw Deathwalker play some Amaterasu, but she still also has problems. Basically, how Deathwalker played Ama is he would just avoid the fights most of the times. He would just farm. He would give his blue buffs up. He didn't really care about those. All he cared to do was just to farm and to live until the late game. If you can do that with Alma, she's really good. However, she does have some pretty bad matchups into the three top tier gods. Mulan is pretty good into her. Achilles, King Arthur, Cucullin, a lot of the top end ones. Ardio also has a pretty good matchup into Alma. So I don't think Alma is in a great spot, but I think she's good as a counter pick. And you can see her in like the third side, red side pick where it's the counter pick, or you can see it in the bottom half of the draft. But we saw in the summer split that solo laners get picked early. Final case picking Arthur first. Other solo laners are picking Arthur early, picking Cucullin early if Arthur's gone. So I would be surprised if Alma becomes any type of value. Honor sucks. Honor sucks right now. I do not see a world where Honor gets picked. Nearly every other ADC is better. If Honor gets some sort of buff, maybe. I don't think Honor is going to have any value. Next up, Anubis. Another just C tier god. His build path is pretty meh right now. He is good early game. He doesn't scale that well. But, I mean, if what you want from your mid lane is to be a god that burns objectives and builds Bancrofts, Anubis is pretty solid. However, I still don't think it's enough for him to get picked. I think he's in the C tier of mages. Not very great. Ao Kuang. Probably one of the worst gods in the game. You can't even get to his late game isn't even that strong. It's pretty average. It's good. It's good. I shouldn't say average. But you cannot even get through his early game, his mid game, to get to the point where he can pop off. I would be absolutely stunned if we see a single Ao Kuang the rest of the year, unless he sees some big buffs. The build for him right now should be good for him, but he is terrible. Even with that build, he is terrible. Afro's slightly above these other mages because she's just a lot more utility. Her build path is actually not too bad. I could see a world where like a Warlock's breastplate build comes in and Afro starts building that and she just starts popping off and she's really good at these builds. Anti-heal also saw a slight adjustment. So maybe that's enough for Afro to become just like a average bottom half pick god. She's more of a counter pick. You're not really ever first picking Afro, but I could see a world where Afro comes in and is somewhat effective in the meta. Apollo, this one might have to change later when I adjust all the other ADCs, but I do not see a single way that Apollo is better than most of the other good hunters. If Apollo is picked a single time, I would be absolutely baffled. Because a lot of these other hunters are just what Apollo is, but better. His build right now is not great. Just the entire kit is just not as good as the other hunters, especially with Ishtar now getting added into the game. Ishtar is going to be one of the top hunters. I don't think Apollo is very good. Next up, Arachne, another absolutely terrible god. She's good early game. She does nothing mid game. She does nothing late game. I do not see a world where Arachne gets picked. I do not see a world where she gets a single pick in the fall split. I also don't even think she's going to get a buff because even the casual players have a hard time against her. So Arachne, pretty bad. So this was going to be my bold take. I think we're going to see a good chunk of Ares for the SPL Fall Split and Worlds. He got 3 really, really big buffs, and he's very, very good into these top level, or the best of the Guardian supports. He doesn't do very well into E set. It's pretty 50-50. If he's ahead, you can kind of kill the E set. If he's behind, E set kind of just bullies him out. Nox is a lot safer than E set is, but Nox is also not great in the meta. Baron is pretty solid right now, and Baron has a good matchup into Ares. But if you look at the Guardian supports, Ares is very, very good into them. He dominates the laning phase if you have a good ADC with him. He dominates the mid game if he has a good 3v3 core fight or 2v2 duo side or solo side. His late game is not that great, but all you got to do is just buy an Emperor's Armor and you can kind of be fine. So I'm not too worried about how bad Ares is going to be late game, but I do see a world where Ares is just going to be very, very good in the SPL. Next up, Artemis. More of a respawn pick. You don't really first pick her. She's good in the meta. Her build is good, but she has some counters that are really good into her. Anhur is really good into her. Even though he's bad right now, he's always going to be a good pick into Artemis. He bullies her out. He can never really die to her, and he has a really good chance of killing the Artemis. But I do still see Artemis as a better than Apollo, better than Anhur. She's very good at just living against most of the good ADCs, and then she scales really well to the late game. RDO. Nothing's killing RDO. You're going to get variety picking this god no matter what. This god could have a 19-second cooldown dash. Harry's still locking her in. She's going to be an A-tier god. I don't see a world where she is not picked. Conduit is really good with her right now. She's very good in the laning phase still. Her 2v2 is really good. I think the one thing that might stop her from being great is the introduction of Renewal being a good item and getting a buff. It makes warriors in that lane against RDO just build Renewal, and then they just kind of out-trade her. No different there. Next up, Athena. Athena's not very great right now. Athena is not very great right now. I think she's just a product of just being like a season 1 god. She doesn't really win many laning phases. She doesn't really dominate the mid game. She does have a good late game, a decent mid game. Her build right now is fine, but she's just not great. I wouldn't pick her. I would be happy if the enemy team picked her. I can't put her above C. I don't think she's like absolutely terrible. She's not the worst support, so she's going to be C tier, but I don't see her being very good. A Willix. I think she has some niche counter pick scenarios where I'm not going to put her in D tier, but I still just don't see a world where Willix sees much value. She has very good counters against some jump gods, but other than that, there's no reason to really pick her. Her early game is not even that strong anymore. Her mid game is pretty whatever unless you get ahead. Her late game is one of the worst out of the assassins. A Willix C tier. Her build right now is fine. Like, this could be a pretty decent meta for her, but her kit's just not very good. Baba. I think the European players may have opened the eyes of the SPL players in terms of how good Baba is. I swear, I think this character is one of the best mages in the game, and I think she should be picked a lot more than she is. But no mid in the SPL likes playing her because of her like clunkiness, how weird she feels to play, the randomness of her kit. But I swear, even beyond that, she is just absolutely busted. She's hard to dive. She farms well. Her build is absolutely broken right now. I'm going to put her in A, but I think she'll be picked more like a B tier god. She's not like a horrible first pick, but I think there's just other gods you want to first pick over her. But I think she's in a spot where you could first pick her and be fine because she just doesn't get countered. They pick like some of those OP counter pick gods like Dodgy, Bastet, and like she plays fine into them. I'm putting Baba in A tier, even though I think she'll be picked like a B tier god. Bacchus, another more aggressive support that got a buff like Ares. I think his buff was good, but I don't think it has as big of an effect as Ares. The anti-Hellenes 3 is really nice. He has good CC. He's got good damage. He's got good tankiness, but he doesn't do anything really great. They dropped his damage a lot. A lot of characters got additional health, additional protections. So Bacchus doesn't really have that absolute like one-shot potential. He has more like not even like half health, maybe about half health, and then he has no CC immunity. He lanes well. His mid game is fine. His late game is fine. I don't see him as a great god. I don't see him as a bad god, but I think he's fine. Bakasura, another one where I just don't really see Baka being meta. All of his items got nerfed because like Osiris and Erlang were just abusing him. Golden Blade is now 2150 gold with not bad stats, with worse stats. Stone Cutting Sword is now 2200 with a worsened passive. His items are just getting nerfed. The only thing that you've really seen a buff from is chin size being now 2650 instead of 2750. But that was even a while ago before these other nerfs happened, so Baka wasn't picked before. I don't see a world where Baka is picked now, but maybe a meta comes out where you want a power farming jungler and Baka just fits that. Baron's more of a counter pick god. He's solid in most games, but he's nothing you really first pick. He plays really well into Yemoja. He plays really well into non-CC immune ultimates or characters without dashes. He doesn't do anything spectacular. He lanes pretty well. His late game is really good, actually. He's got one of the better late games for supports because he's a Lonos god. And then his mid game's fine. His damage is also fine, but he is exploitable. If he falls behind, he is one of the worst guardians or one of the worst supports in the game. And I don't really see him being picked in other roles. Maybe you see him in solo lane, but I would doubt it. Bastet, all I hear is junglers saying that Bastet is terrible. I don't think she's that bad. I think she's fine, but I don't think she's good by any means. I think she's like high C tier, low B tier. I think she makes more sense in C than she does in B, but I think she's more top end C than most of these gods. Her build right now is fine. I think her damage is a little bit low. Her cooldowns are also really high, so she doesn't have that like great usage of her kit. Her build right now is fine, so it's not like it's a build thing. I think other assassins just do a little bit more than her. Some things will be out of order because the newer gods are going to be at the bottom. Next up, Bellona. This is one of the few gods where I just have no idea. I have really no idea where Bellona is going to get valued. She goes like up and down and up and down and up and down. Like her build right now, Death Toll, Berserkers, Sov, whatever it is, Witchblade, whatever it is in a fine spot. I think the only reason we won't see Bellona played is because she can't really kill the Atlases, the Kakolins, the RDOs, and then her late game isn't as good because she's not a Bluestone user. I think she's better than the C tier grouping, but I don't think she's up there with like Amma. I think she's like bottom side B tier. Cabrakan. I see Cabrakan as probably our first S tier character. He is loved by a lot of supports. He is very good in mid. He's very good in solo. He's very good in support. So flex potential is huge right now in Smite because of like this meta that Smite is in. Being able to flex these characters and pick them early and then just like avoid showing the enemy team where they are is huge right now. He might be a little overrated. I don't think he's like absolutely OP. I would probably put him more towards A, but I think he is overvalued at the SPL level, and I think because of that, I'm going to put him in S tier. His kits right now, it's in a very good place. Like I said, he has flex potential. The regrowth Manticore build is very good in support. The Ranga's build with Bancroft's Claw is very good, and his name's Cabroken, like S tier. He's got to be. Camazotz. Kama's another god that just comes out every once in a while. He's very good if he gets ahead in solo lane. I don't really see him as a jungler in the current meta of Smite. I see him more as a solo laner, and I think his solo lane build is not that great, but I think he's just a fallback god for some of these players. So I could see him coming out, maybe a couple trades. The enemy picks Arthur and you don't want to lose lane, and you pick something that can scale pretty well, so you pick Camazotz. I'm going to put him in C tier. I think his kit is not great. His build is fine. Solid C tier. Serb, another guardian that got buffed with Ares and Bacchus. I think he's more in a B tier spot. I could see a world where Serb becomes completely meta because Tainted gets buffed, Serb gets buffed, Anti-Heal gets slightly nerfed. He's one of the few guardians that I can actually lane against these warriors. So I could see Cerberus becoming one of those top tier guardians up here with RDO. Actually, let's do it. Let's commit to it. I think Serb is going to be one of the better solo laners for the Guardians. I think he's going to be an okay support right now. We've already seen Mike play him before his buffs, and now with his buffs, he's just a lot stronger. I'm going to put Serb in A tier. I'm expecting some Serb play. Next up, Cernanos. Cernanos is pretty dead. You haven't really seen any picks from him. Don't really see a world where Cern is valued very high. He's not great in the laning phase. I mean, he's a good laning phaser. He has some good matchups, but he also has some really bad matchups that he can get punished with. And then late game Cern is probably one of the easiest hunters to kill. He's one of those late game hunters where it's either you kill him by one-shotting him, or he kills you by one-shotting you because of his passive. Because of that, I think he's a C-tier god. I think a lot of the other hunters are just better. Ishtar also coming out would have a really good matchup into Cern if you just think about how the 1v1 would play, the 2v2 would play. Chalk, B-tier. Over the entire history of Smite, Chalk's either been like below average, average, or above average. Like just in that little niche of characters. I actually think his build right now is pretty decent. Like Bluestone, Glads, he can build Manticore. He actually has a lot of damage just through items and a lot of survivability in his kit with his ult, his 3. His laning phase is solid. He lanes well against Arthur. He lanes well against Kakulin. But a lot of SPL players don't like playing him. That's what makes me a little nervous to put him into A tier. I also don't think he's like an A tier character. I think he's more B tier. I don't know entirely where he will be getting picked. He's kind of like Bellona, where I could see him pop up into that top higher tier because of what he does. I can also see him fall down because people just don't want to play him. But I think he is about a B tier character. Chang'e. Chang'e has got some meaty buffs recently. She's now got about 1,000 base health at level 2. She's got good base damage. She scales really well into the late game. She's hard to punish. She plays 2 roles at least to a decent level. She plays mid, she plays solo. But she's also one of these gods that hasn't seen playtime in a while. And usually when gods haven't seen playtime in a while, SPL players are less likely to be pulling them out. But I think she's probably in this B to A tier echelon. She uses Mirrodin really well. The Warlock's Mirrodin build she uses really well. Some junglers might have decent mashups into her, which may cause like her not wanting to get early picked. Maybe she's going to be more of a counter pick. But I definitely don't see her reaching into that top tier of mages. But I could see her as a nice counter pick, or maybe a third side, second pick type of pick. Turtlebog. This character has gone from an S tier down to A tier, down to like kind of a B tier-ish area. I think he kind of got overvalued a little bit. I think he punished teams for playing badly. Because of that, I think he was overpicked. I think he's now in a spot where he is a decent hunter still, and he has a lot of value, and he's something you can top pick because he has a lot of safety. He's hard to counter pick. But I think now he's kind of in a spot where he's like a B tier character. He forces teams to play better, because you have this global that's pretty instant, and then he's hard to punish it when he comes over. But I think his kit, he doesn't lane very well. He doesn't play in the mid game too spectacularly. He can get walked at pretty easily, and all those nerfs are just finally coming through. I think he fell far just because of the nerfs finally coming through, and teams finally realizing that, oh, if he ults over, we just run away from the fight, and our ADC is now up an entire level. So I think teams have just finally learned to play smarter around him and just think about his ult. Chiron, another A tier hunter, same kind of story as AMC. A lot of players just fall back onto him. He has a lot of pressure. He's got a lot of damage. He uses Bluestone well. His build right now is fantastic. He plays 2 roles, which is huge. Like I said, flexibility in these gods is very, very big. And I think Cern is in a great spot. Honestly, I could see a world where Chiron is valued into this S tier. The other thing that makes me not put him in S tier is because I don't think he'll see a ton of bans. I think teams disrespect Chiron a little bit. Teams like the Kings just value this god above 99% of the other ones. Netroid will play it almost any game. Big Man will play it almost any game. I do think he has a lot of value, and I think he's in a very good spot. Next up, Kronos. Did he even see a buff? This character is just pretty much dead. All the rings are pretty bad. His build currently is bad. His kit overall is bad. I think he's probably the worst of the magical ADCs. Sol has pressure with mannequins. Oleron has pressure with mannequins and scales into the late game. Freya has good laning phase with conduit and scales into the late game. Kronos has terrible early game, terrible mid game, terrible late game. Actually, let me rephrase it. He's got good early late game and then terrible late game because he just gets one shot before his ult can get off. His build also not good. I don't see a world where Kronos is played unless he gets buffs. Even in mid, I don't think he gets played. Cthulhu, another character that just kind of is like a nice little fallback for some of the solo laners. He doesn't really dominate the laning phase. He doesn't dominate the mid game. Late game though, he's pretty dominant. He does good damage. He's hard to kill, and he has good matchups into some of the harder gods to counter. Gods like Oleron. Actually, I guess it's mainly Oleron. He's one of the few gods, one of the few late game tanks that has a good matchup. It's like him and Kuzumbo. And then Kuzumbo's just not that fantastic. I think Cthulhu's a B tier. His build right now is pretty bad. I don't know what he would even build. Jade Emps is fine, but it's expensive. Breastplate is good, but it gives no health. Sov is fine, but it gives no cooldown. Witchblade is okay, but it gives no procs. Like, he just doesn't have a ton of items that are just super valuable for him. His build over the late game, if you can get 5-6 items, is really good. Maybe like a renewal into Manticore build would be good, but then you have to get through the laning phase, so yeah. Cthulhu will put in B tier, but Cthulhu is also another one of those gods that Worlds comes around, games go late, teams might start valuing him a little bit more. Cucullin, probably our best A tier god so far, other than maybe Chiron. He's basically just, I mean, Fine says it all the time. He's budget Arthur. He does what Arthur does, everything Arthur does, just slightly worse. He's not as safe. He's not as good in the early game. He doesn't do as much damage late game. He's a little bit easier to lock down. But the one thing that Arthur actually does a lot better than, Cucullin does a lot better than Arthur is his blink engaged late game. Cucullin just excels at. He can get a blink like 2, 3, 4-man knockup into a 1 and just get like 2, 3 bluestone procs on a bunch of different gods. Cucullin actually does that really well, and Arthur can't really do that. Arthur blink ults 1 guys. Other than that, Arthur is just better Cucullin. Cupid got a little nerf, but he's still one of the best hunters in the game. His late game is fantastic. His mid game is fantastic. His early game is impossible to play against. You basically have to kill this god before he hits level 3. Otherwise, the laning phase is over, and he has pressure on your purple buff. I think they overbuffed him a little bit. I think he was actually maybe in a fine spot before then with the buff to the health. It makes it harder for him to get killed in the laning phase. And then they buffed his one to have 80% scale, or it's like 120% scaling, I think. Or no, it's 160% scaling. It's 80 and 80, I think. Don't quote me on that, but I think. So he's got stupid damage. He basically just ults you, trades your ult or your beads, and then he begs his jungler to come over and just get a free kill. Cupid in a good spot. Dodgy is just very good with some players. Some players like Laz, like Cuvo, just pick Dodgy and they will win you a game. And I think she has like the skill to do that, but I think it kind of depends on the comps that you have with Dodgy. She's very good into some of the top picks, but she's also very bad into some of the top picks. She's also very good at, she's a very good throwaway ban for the first side because she just has such good picks into her. But Dodgy's just still in a very good spot. Her builds are good. Her abilities are good. Her ult is good. She scales well into the late game. She wastes a lot of time late game. Even if she can't kill you, she just sits in the air for 7 seconds and you just are sitting there doing nothing because you can't kill her and your team is diving and they're getting punished. I think Dodgy's in a very good spot. All right, next up, Danzaburo. Danzaburo does not see many picks, and it's because he's just overall pretty weak. His build isn't great right now. He has some bad matchups into some of the top tiers. He doesn't really do anything great. He's okay laning phase. He's okay mid game. He's okay late game. But a lot of his junglers just kill him before he can do anything. I think a big problem with him is his abilities aren't instant. His 1 is instant, but it's just damage. His 2, he has to like mix around, swirl around, take a little sniff from, and then he tosses it. His 3, kind of like the same thing. He tosses his little area down and then he kind of sits in it and does nothing and then dies. It's just not great. His ult, same thing. It takes a couple seconds for him to jump in it, to get away. Junglers just kill him before he can do anything. And I think that limits a lot of what he does. I'm putting him in C tier. I don't see many Danzaburos being picked. Disco. I think Disco's kit right now is not in like an absolute fantastic spot, but she gets a lot of picks. She's really just picked to win the solo lane. I mean, she's not bad. I think she's like a B tier god like the rest of her kit, but the passive is just valued a lot for these solo laners. Like if Arthur gets passive, he just dominates solo lane. You can't even go to that side of the map. He walks at your jungler. Your jungler's like, he one-shots me. And that's where her value comes from. And because of that, because of just how much solo laners have impact on the meta right now and how important they are, I'm putting her in A tier. If you get an Arthur Disco combo, if you get Kakolan Disco and they don't have Arthur, or even if they do have Arthur, you kind of just win that side of the map. Disco A tier. Erlong. This one is just weird because he's gotten so many nerfs and buffs and like changes and like he is in just a really weird spot. I still think he's a fine god. I still think he's actually like an A, B tier god, but he's not getting picked like it. I can't justify putting him in A. He's gotten a lot of nerfs. He doesn't have as much CC. His build path has also gotten nerfed a lot. But he's a mannequin user, and I think mannequin users they just abuse the meta. They're so strong early game, you can't fight against them. I'll put him in B tier, but easily, like, Worlds comes around. You need that early pressure. Erlang instantly becomes A, S tier god, banned most games. I think he's somewhere in B or A tier, but he doesn't have the picks or the value from the SPL teams to put him any higher. Fafnir, pretty mid-tier support. He does what you need him to do. He's really hard to kill in the laning phase, but he doesn't really win many laning phases. He scales well into the late game. He actually scales well into the mid game too, just because of his passive. He gets extra gold. It makes him very strong. A lot of CC. He's in a good spot. Fenrir. Fenrir's in a fine spot. I think he's a pretty average jungler. He doesn't do anything great. He doesn't do anything bad. I mean, early game, I guess he does great. Late game, he scales into just a god who just looks to ult and play for beads and kill people like that. He's still a good 1v1 god. He has good outplay potential. His build is fine right now. I don't think it's great. And then his kit is in a fine spot. I don't really think he'll have any value in support. I think support assassins for the most part are dead, besides maybe Serket. Even then, I don't think she's that great in support. We may see a meta where these junglers like Fenrir, Naja, Serket are played, and they go this weird semi-hybrid tank build with Manticore, Glad Shield, Protector of the Jungle, something like that, Magi's. And if that comes out, if that becomes the meta build in jungle and that becomes what people value, he could jump up to S and A tier. Currently, though, I think he is a B tier god. This is also the same thing that can happen with Erlang, is maybe that Manticore Berserkers build with the mannequin item that is good late game at level 20 comes out, but I can't really put him any higher because that's just kind of me guessing. If I had to guess right now, I think Fenrir is more likely to be the one to climb up. Freya's in a good spot right now. Her build is really good. She's very hard to 1v1. She's in this weird spot where she's really, really good early game, really, really good mid game, really, really good late game. Her build's really good, but she's still like weirdly like not good at the same time. You can punish her. She's pretty easy to punish pre-5, but she's hits the wave. She clears the wave pretty well. She's one of the best late game mage ADCs. Her build right now is very good. So she's in like this weird like middle ground of she's very good, but she's also very risky. If she falls behind, she's just like useless. But I'm going to put her in A tier. You've already seen a lot of value from Netroid with her. And I see a world where the rings get buffed because they are in a pretty bad spot. So I'm going to put Freya in A tier. Next up, Ganesh. Ganesh is a fine support. He's somewhere sitting in this B tier. He's like a weird god because he kind of just relies on the enemy team to make mistakes and then he punishes them. And then he also relies on his team making plays and he just like makes them better. He doesn't really do anything great by himself unless like you just absolutely just smoke somebody and like they're not ready for it. His laning phase is pretty bad. He's not great in the mid game. His late game is also pretty good. Like if you get to the late game with Ganesh, you're in a very good spot. His build is also good, so like he's not terrible right now. I can't say he's terrible, but I also don't think he's in like that next tier of a very average something like these gods. But he does just less stuff than these god, if that makes sense. Geb, I think Geb is just one of the worst guardians in the game right now at a comp level. I really don't even think his late game is in a great spot, really. A lot of the late game gods have an even better late game than Geb. Yamoja plays better late game. Ares is a good pick into him. Sherb scales decently into the late game because of his passive. Eset, one of the best late game guardians or late game supports, is just good into Geb. And then even if you can get there, like that's not even saying you can get to the late game. There's a chance you just lose the laning phase in first 2 minutes of the game, lose your purples, and then you're just out of the game. I think Geb is pretty terrible. If this is ranked though, Geb's somewhere up here. Guan, with Fae Blessed being changed, I think it makes Guan more likely to make a comeback. I don't think he's in a horrible place. I don't think he's in a great place. He also got a cooldown buff to his 2 and his 1. And then Fae Blessed also gives cooldown. I could see a world where Guan pops up into this A tier, but I think right now I'm going to put him in B tier. He's like pretty average into Cthulhu, into Arthur. Like he lanes well against them. Kind of depends how the mid and late game fares against the enemy supports or the enemy backline, the support, the mid, the ADC. But I think Guan could easily come into this A tier and be a counter pick against Cthulhu, against Arthur, because I think his build is really good right now. Hachiman, I mean, this is the quintessential average ADC. Buddy's got nothing bad, nothing good. He's a safe ADC. That's about all it is. There's nothing else with Hachiman. He's got an average laning phase, average mid game, average late game. His build is average. His kit is average. He is just average. If all 9 ADCs better than him are banned, he's a perfect pick. Average. Hades. I think Hades is going to be one of these ones where it's going to be a super volatile playstyle where either he's going to be A tier, abusing Claw, abusing Vamp Shroud, abusing Typhons, Poly, the new Poly. But I think it's more likely that he is just not picked at all and he has no value in comp. He's very good ranked, but all you got to do is just build some anti-heal and then you just kind of smoke him. I'll put him in B tier just on the off chance that he has some counter pick potential. Maybe he just dominates Arthur. Maybe he just dominates Cullen. Maybe he dominates Guan. And then he can just kind of 2v1 from solo side of the map. I don't think he really has flex potential. He's mostly a solo laner. I think he's pretty average. Hebo. I think Hebo is terrible. This character is so bad. Maybe you see him played in the jungle, but even then, I think he's terrible. Absolutely terrible. His build is bad. He doesn't do damage. He's not safe. He doesn't scale well into the late game. Maybe with like a Blink full damage build, he has some potential, but I think he is terrible. I would take Janus jungle, Poseidon jungle, Ao Kuang jungle over Hebo if you want a magical jungle. Heim, his kit is just in a good spot. It's always going to be good unless his numbers get absolutely killed. Heim is always going to be a fine pick. He has a good counter pick into Cupid. He has a good pick into Freya because he can just trade his ult with her ult and her beads. Nothing really downside. His build is fine right now. Heim is in a solid spot, and I expect him to be played a good amount SPL wise. Hell, I think we have to put Hell in A tier. She always comes out for Worlds. She always is just a good god in the fall split. Anti-heal sees some small nerfs. Maybe you see this hybrid build with Hell where you go Breastplate into Fae Blessed in mid or in solo lane. Chance Variety plays her in solo lane. I think she has a chance of being a top tier god. I think she is more of just a B tier god. She's just volatile where she either runs a game or does nothing. And because of that, I would put her more in B tier, but I think she will see a lot of value. Hera. Hera's another one where I don't really see her, like, she's just a super average god. I don't really see her doing anything spectacularly. She's easy to punish in the early game, but her mid game and late game is very good. Her build path right now, Warlocks, Mirrodin, that build is very good on her. I think she's good in most mid matchups. Some of the assassins have good matchups into her. Some Guardians have good matchups into her, but if she can get to that late game, she's very, very good. Hercules. I think Hercules is just pretty bad right now. They've tried to buff him. His build path isn't terrible, but his kit just doesn't work well. He doesn't win most solo lanes. He doesn't outclear in solo lane. His ability into the late game is not that great. His dual lane is pretty bad. Maybe you see him as just a counter pick as something that's safe. But if you want something that's safe, I would just recommend Chalk, because at least Chalk does something in the mid and late game other than just displace. He actually has like chances to kill with Manticore, Glide Shield, Bluestone. I'm a big Herc fan in this current meta. Also his kit. Horus. I think Horus is one of the better ranked or comp supports right now. I also think he has viability and flex potential into solo lane, but I do think his main role, his best role is support. He wins a lot of 2v2s. He has a lot of punish potential in the jungle. Late game, just the ult potential and the things you can do with his ult is always what makes him such a cool comp character. I think really only Genetics has pulled it out recently and been like super dominant with it, but there's a world where Ronnie pulls it out. There's a world where Haddox pulls it out. Wrong you, not Ronnie, not Scary. There's a world where Jake pulls it out. I think he has a lot of strengths. He has only a couple weaknesses, and I don't think any of those weaknesses are that exploitable. I think Horse will be one of the better supports coming into Worlds. He's also very good into the mage supports. He's very good into E-set. He can like kind of just one-shot her. He's good into Baron. He can kind of just one-shot him and avoid the ult. Nox is the only one where it's kind of like he's not that great into her because she kind of just plays back. If he ever dashes her, she just wants him. If he ever just kind of walks at her and she doesn't like where she's at, she just twos her feet and then dashes away. But like I said earlier in the video, I don't think Nox is in that great of a spot. Hu Yi. I think Hu Yi is one of your better hunters, but I don't think he's in that A tier with Heim, with Freya, with AMC, with Chiron. I think he's more of a counter pick into some of the unsafe hunters that you want to 1v1. His kit's in a fine spot. His build is actually in a really good spot right now. His laning phase is still just bad like it's always been, but he clears the jungle well. His late game is very good, and he is one of the most like... When you think of an ADC that they're like, okay, who do you want this game? Like skill expression, like what do you want to play? Hu Yi is a lot of the time an ADC of choice for a lot of ADCs. Panda Cat, I know Stu likes it. Net, I don't really see playing it. I can't really think of the other hunters in the SPL, but Hu Yi is always kind of a pick that comes out and he sees a lot of value. Hunbats is probably going to be one of the better junglers in this Worlds and fall meta. I think he does what he does well, and if you expect him to do anything else, he doesn't really excel. He farms really well. If you want a jungler that farms to 5 and then fights well, that's what Humbats does. His build right now is very good. He doesn't have that many counter picks. Dodgy's very good into him. He's got a couple other mages and hunters that are good into him. But he does have some really good matchup into the Guardian supports. He said he just blink and ult and splits the fight, and then she can't get her stuff off. Geb, same thing. Kepri, same thing. More of those backline Guardians. They can't really do too much against Humbats. He just hits some nice blink ult, and then they're just kind of sitting there getting feared away. But he is still like slightly risky because he doesn't fight early game well. He doesn't fight totem well. But I think he's always going to be a solid pick at what he does. E-set. She's getting a pretty noticeable nerf, but I still just see her as one of the most valuable gods in the game. Like, at a comp level, her kit is just perfect. If the game isn't sloppy, if the game is slow, if the game is calculated, if the game is like a 3v3, 2v2, 5v5, no real like 1v1 pick potential scuffles, E-set is one of the best gods in the game. Those nerfs maybe scared off some teams a little bit. Nerfs. Because they weren't that big, but she still flexes to support, flexes to mid. Honestly, she's not even like that bad in ADC, solo, jungle. She is one of the few gods that can play all 5 roles, and then she just has objective secure. She scales late game. She has a couple bad matchups. Dodgy has a decent matchup into her. Horus in the laning phase against E-set is also very good. I think Serb is actually a pretty good pick into the E-set right now, but she is just still so darn good at what she does. As long as the game isn't sloppy, E-set excels. Izanami, I think Izanami's pretty terrible right now. She's kind of just gotten nerfed out of a spot where she was strong. She was really strong in the laning phase. She would kind of just push you under your tower. She would hit buff. She would then go to your purple buff. She doesn't do that very well anymore. You kind of just jump on her. You trade with her. You could fight into her. Her build right now is not very good. I don't really see much Izanami in the SPL over the next couple months or at Worlds, unless you get some nice buffs. Janus. I think Janus is dead. I think he is probably one of the worst mages in the game. I think the only reason I'm not putting him in D tier is because he's kind of a fallback option for some mages or for some mid lanes. I know Brendan likes him. There's a couple other that like him too, but his build right now is absolutely horrendous. The cooldown build is terrible. The only way that we see Janus is if he's a comfort pick for someone like Brendan, or if he is buffed big, like hugely buffed by like Chronos Pendant or Deso or something like that. Janus, though, C tier. Jingwei, another pretty average god. She's got some good matchups into Freya. She's got a good matchup into Heim. She scales well into the late game. She's hard to punish like Hachiman. I do think she's in a slightly worse spot than Hachiman. I think Hachiman is slightly less safe, but he does what she does, like laning phase and mid game and late game. Actually, not late game, but mid game and early game a little bit better. Has a little bit more CC, better CC. His 2 gives additional attack speed to destroy objectives. But I think Jing's in a fine spot. She's a really good pick into Freya, and I think that's a lot of the times where we'll see her. Next up, Jorm. I'm trying to even think if like it's worth talking about Jorm. I just think he's terrible. I think he's just a product of earlier Smite, and then he just got nerfed so hard because of how powerful he was back then that he is just so bad now. His passive is just not good. He's not displaceable, which is solid, but then he takes extra damage. Why would a tank ever want to take extra damage? No sense. No sense. He lanes fine. His builds are whatever right now. If you want to play a Guardian in solo lane and be like useful, just pick Surb, just pick Cthulhu, just pick Artio. I mean, even Ares in solo lane is just better, and he's not a good support. Kali. Honestly, I think Kali is not that great. I think she was really only played by a couple players, and even then it was mostly just them kind of having more like pop-up performances or just farming into the late game, and then they just do stuff as Kali. I think her kit's pretty average. Yeah, that nerf was also really bad for her. She's going to be someone that even when she can 1-for-1 in the early game, she'll just die right after. And then if she can't 1-for-1, she's just dead. She also farms not well anymore. I think she's still not terrible. I think she's pretty average, but I don't really see her getting too many picks. She's more of like a counter pick, like, oh, they have Cthulhu. Okay, I can play Kali. I can build Shins. I can just shred him. They have a really tanky comp, maybe like a weird mid lane like Kabrakan or something like that, where they're looking to engage onto you and you can kind of pick them apart. Maybe you see some Kali. She's just not good early game. She's trying to scale to the late game, and she does it okay right now. Khepri, probably the best support right now. I think Emoja's gotten nerfed a few too many times for her to be passed by Khepri, and I think Khepri is better than Eset. I think the only reason Eset is S tier is she has flex potential, and I think that's what put her in the S tier. Like I've said now a couple times in this video, flex potential is OP in this current level of Smite. Players are really good. They know counter picks really well. So if you pick them something that they can exploit, they will exploit it. And that makes these gods, like he said, super strong. But I think Khepri is just so hard to deal with currently. He wins almost every single laning phase. His mid game is OP. His late game is OP. His build right now is powerful. His relics are powerful. Khepri A tier. I could see him like an argument of him in S tier, but I'm going to put him in A tier for now, just because I don't think he's in this like upper echelon. King Arthur. Speaking of upper echelon, Arthur's build right now is absolutely busted. Everything about Arthur is just OP. He does enough damage to kill you late game. He's very hard to deal with. He lanes very well. He gets totems. He procs Bluestone. He procs Glad Shield. He gets multiple Manticore procs. This character has everything going for him. He is the best solo laner. He's probably the best god in the game. Like, I would see a lot of bans for him. I expect Final K to not get many Arthurs going into the fall and summer split, and most other players won't either. Arthur S tier. Very, very good. Kukulkan. I'm going to put Kukulkan in C tier, but I would be fine putting him in B tier because I think he might see some picks. I just think he's not valuable at the SPL level. He farms and he plays to just get to late game and then just try to one-shot you. And that's really all he does. He's very easy to pick. He doesn't farm that well. He can't really do his own red buff. Other mages just kind of do what mages need to do better. So I'm not going to put Kuku any higher. Kuku's C tier. Kumba. Actually, I'll put him in C tier because he's seen a couple plays. But Kumba, C tier. Not very good. I'm going to just put these two both. They're both Guardians that just don't do enough damage. They don't have enough CC. Their laning phase is pretty meh. They scale okay, but not as good as other Guardians. They have like kind of the opposite problem of Bacchus, Ares, Serb. They just don't do enough with what they do. Loki, pretty average jungler right now. He is someone you can't exploit. He's got some bad matchups. Suki just absolutely dominates Loki. A couple other gods are just very good into Loki. But if Loki gets a lead, he's very hard to deal with. You can just one-shot your mage and get out without taking any damage. And he can kind of run games if he gets ahead. However, he also, if he falls behind, doesn't really do anything other than damage. His ult is something you can easily CC immune with your ult. You can beads and dash away, or you can just try to kill him. Loki, pretty meh. Medusi, B tier. Medusi's in a fine spot. She tries to kill you before you kill her, kind of like CERN. But I think she does it a little bit better. Her ult is a little bit better in team fights. Her damage is a little bit better. Her passive is really hard to like hit her with in trading 1v1s. Her build right now is actually pretty good. I like her with the trans build. But yeah, I don't think she's fantastic. She's nothing in this top tier of hunters, but she's fine. Mercury, speeding into the B tier is Mercury. Another god whose items have kind of gotten nerfed a lot. He doesn't build Golden Blade anymore. He doesn't build Stone Cutting anymore. Or if he does build them, they're the nerfed versions. But he's still a crit god, so he scales very well. He can kind of just walk to objectives and one-shot them. If he gets ahead, he's very hard to deal with. His build right now is not great, but if he gets to the Deathbringer, then he's bringing death. Mercury, average, B tier. Merlin, one of our better mages. He procs Reaver like 10 times because of his passive. And then he's got 10 different abilities. The Warlock's build into Mirrodin, into Reaver, Obshard is just broken on Merlin. He's very safe. He farms well. He scales well into the late game. He's hard to dive because he can kind of one-shot you back even if you're out diving him. Fantastic spot. One of the better mages. Mulan, another pretty mid-tier solo laner. I'm surprised we didn't see her too much when Arthur and Kukulkanar played, because she's one of the few warriors that actually fights well into them, and she out trades them with her damage, and then she has healing from her too, and they just don't have that. So I was a bit surprised that we didn't see much Mulan, but she is very bad in the late game. She's kind of hoping that she can just end the game before the enemy team gets their like 5th item. So I can't really put her any higher or like tell teams to like play her or think she's more OP than she is, because she has clear weaknesses. But I was a bit surprised that we didn't see much Mulan to counter the Arthurs and to counter the Kukulkans. Neith. Neith is not in that upper echelon of hunter mids where AMC, Chiron, but I think she is probably the 3rd hunter mid. Probably just more of a B tier character. She doesn't flex at all like the other two do. If she's being played, she is 99% of the time being played in mid. Mid lane, her build is good right now, but she kind of just does worse than AMC and Chiron, but she still does what they do at a worse rate. So if those two are banned or if they're picked, you can still play her. Nem. With the Nem nerfs, I'm pretty sure she's dead. They killed her. I think the last patch made it so she was in a fine spot, and then they nerfed her again, and now it's like, damn, this character is just some ass. Her build now is dead. Her kit doesn't do enough damage. She's not that safe. She doesn't farm that well. She's still good if she gets to late game. Honestly, it's not like her late game is any worse, but she's going to have such a harder time getting there. If you're going to play a character that has a bad early game, but gets to late game and you can kind of win, just play Kali, just play Mercury. Naja. Naja's that same kind of conversation that I had with Fenrir, where maybe that weird trans Manticore Glad Shield Magi's build comes out regrowth, where she has like this perfect build that feels unreal on her. She gets a lot of playing time because of that, but she isn't in that top tier of, I said she, yeah. Idiot. He. She's not in that top tier of assassin. She can't be played in every game no matter what. She has her nice counter picks. B tier. Nike. Nox. She was one of the top supports with ESET, with Baron, but she's fallen out of favor a little bit. She has some bad or meh matchups into a lot of the good gods right now. She also is kind of a one-trick pony where she misses her one. She's kind of just irrelevant. If she falls behind, she's kind of just irrelevant. But she does scale well into the late game. She's a Lonos mage, so she does get to that late game where she has 2 power items and then 4 defense items with Lonos, or 3 defense items with Lonos. She's very hard to deal with, but she's kind of just worse than ESET. She's just worse than Baron. Nuwa. I'd be a bit surprised if we didn't see maybe a couple Nuwa picks. I do think she is getting a little undervalued right now. I think the build right now for her is really good. I think she builds Sands, Warlocks, Mirrodin, Reaver, Obshard, and then some other cooldown item. And I think she's actually in a really, really good spot. I think her problem is that she just doesn't do what other mages do, and that's why you don't really play her. Like, if you want to play Nuwa, you want to play somebody that scales well in the late game, you can just go Baba, you can just go Merlin, you can just go Hell, something like that. But I do still think Nuwa's fine. I think she just gets outdone by a couple of the other mages. Odin. I think he's pretty average. I don't think he's terrible. His build right now is fine. His laning phase, although weak, is not like horrendous. And then his late game, he's one of the hardest warriors to deal with because he does like solid damage. He pokes you down slowly and he's really hard to lock down. But I think he's just outdone by a lot of the other warriors. Olorun. I think Olorun is one of the best dual lane gods in the game. He does not lose like any matchups. He is a 50-50 into Cupid, where if he gets ahead, he just smashes Cupid. If Cupid gets ahead, Cupid kind of just smashes him. And then late game, he does kind of what Cupid does, but has a better team fight ult than Cupid. His build right now is good. He lanes well. He's very hard to deal with. If you don't have a certain comp to deal with him, he's not going to be very easy to deal with. And I do actually think he's a little bit underrated right now. I think he should be picked with this top tier of gods, with this Freya, Heim, Cupid, but he does not see that type of picks. I don't think he's great in mid like Paul's been playing him, but I think he's fine. I think he's more of a B tier mid laner. I think he's more exploitable, not great in the 2v2 because you can kind of one-shot him, but still, I think he's good. Osiris. This god is unkillable. He's unkillable. Even when he becomes useless in the jungle with his 3 getting nerfed to whatever it is now, 10 to 20%, he's still going to be played in solo lane. His build is good. He's hard to deal with. His passive is super useful. He's got a lot of good poke. He can go multiple different builds. You know a character's like his kit is good when he builds just what the best items are. This man is just slapping on a Glad Shield. He's slapping on Berserkers. He's slapping on Blackthorns. He's slapping on Mystical Mails. He does not care what the best possible item is. He's just building it. That's how good Osiris is. And I think even now, after his nerfs, I think you'll still see him in solo lane. I think his jungle is a little bit weak. He still builds mannequins, which is really good. But I think if he falls behind, he's useless. And I think late game, he is useless. But if you want to end the game in 20 minutes, I think he's good. Pele. I think the current Pele build is absolutely filthy. Into Crusher, into Erendite, into Magi's is an absolutely perfect build for her, and it actually makes her a super strong threat. She's really good in the early game at farming. She gets to 5 really quickly. She's not somebody you really want to fight once she gets that power spike, because she can kind of just one-shot you, and then she just dives the mid laner just really easily. Most of these mid laners have a bad matchup into Pele, or she just has a manageable matchup where you can just play her and you're not hating your life too much. Pele in a very good spot, A tier. Persephone. I think Persephone has the same problem Baba has, where mid laners don't like playing her. She's got so many good matchups that I think aren't getting played. She's really good in a lot of the Guardians that are getting picked. Eset, Khepri, like Ares, if Ares becomes meta. Artio, she's very good into. Bacchus becomes meta. She's very good into Bacchus. I think teams just aren't practice on her, so I don't think they think about playing her. But I think she's actually in a pretty solid spot. I know a lot of people hate her because she's not old Pers, but current Pers is actually pretty strong. Also, another thing that maybe stops her from getting play is her 1 is really, really clunky. Like, for some reason, some walls on the Smite map just stick out like miles past where they are, and then you just won the wall, and you're like, well, okay, guys, I have no damage for the next 15 seconds. Like, let's play back. But I think even with that, I think she's super strong. I think her build with Warlocks Mirrodin is in a very solid spot. And I think she should be getting played. She might not because of her 1, but I think she might. Or I think she should, sorry. Poseidon, another very strong mage. Probably the best mage jungle. His build right now is pretty solid. It's not great. Maybe if Duomore was a bit stronger, he'd be picked a bit more. Actually, he just saw that recent nerf to his movement speed. So I am going to move him down to average tier. But I still think he's the best magical jungler or mage jungler. Maybe there's a guardian jungler I'm forgetting that's better than him. I think he's pretty solid right now. He's got good objectives secured despite what the past 7 worlds have taught us. I think he's in a solid spot. Raijin. I think this is going to be my bold take. So this was going to be my bold take. I think Raijin getting the buff to his 1 makes it so his early game is no longer horrendous, and his current build is in a very good spot where he should be getting played. He can now farm efficiently. He can clear efficiently. He scales well into the mid and late game. He's a very good team fighting god. And if he gets ahead, he kind of just can do whatever he wants because he's safe with his 3. He does have some bad matchups. Pele kind of just one-shots him. Some other junglers just kind of one-shot him before he can do anything. But I think there's a good chance that Raijin gets played. Rama. He does what you need him to do. He farms well. If you get him to the late game, he's very good. If you have a dive comp, he's very good at diving with just being the only one peeling for himself because he wastes so much time in the air. His build right now isn't great, which makes me want to put him in B, which I probably will. But Rama's always going to be kind of okay as long as his build is not terrible. Ra, I don't really see a world where Ra is played. I think a lot of the other mages kind of do what he does better. I don't think his build right now is particularly good. His items right now are particularly good. He's not terrible. I could see him coming out and seeing a couple picks, and maybe we move him into the B tier, but currently I don't see a place where Ra's picked. Maybe Benny. Ratatasker. Rat might be another one that's just an S tier because of flex potential. He's very good in solo. He's very good in jungle. His builds are good in both. The Glad Shield, Manticore, the Acorn that does the double procs of your 2, and then the Stun Acorn is very good in the jungle. So he has 2 roles that he plays. He flexes to both. He's good in both. And I know a lot of junglers like him. A lot of solo laners like him. He is one of the few gods that scales well with Arthur, even if he's not as good as Arthur in the laning phase. But I still think Rat's in a very good spot. Next up, Robin. I think Robin is in a pretty meh spot. He's not terrible, but I also don't think he's great. His build right now is fine, but it's not like fantastic. I think like overall he's pretty average. He does what you need him to do. He's kind of safe. He's kind of good at diving. If he gets ahead though, he's very hard to deal with. He'll just blink and one-shot you and you're kind of stuck sitting there like what just happened. But I don't think he's in this top tier junglers. Scylla's pretty average. We saw her last year just come out of nowhere and just start dominating, and then she got a nerf. Her build right now is pretty meh. She doesn't farm very well. She might even be worse than B tier, maybe down to C tier. I'm gonna put her in C tier because I think I'd rather have Nuwa. I'd rather have Hera. I'd rather have Afro. So we're gonna put Scylla in C tier because her build's not good, her kit's not good, or her kit's fine, I guess, but her build's not good. She doesn't really get to her late game or mid game where she's great. Serket. So I just want to emphasize it one more time. Serket is in that chance of being in the same spot as Naja and Fenrir, where she just has this absolutely busted hybrid build where you can't kill her and she just kills you with Glad Shield, Manticore. I see a world both where she just not going to pick a single time and where she is just one of the top pick junglers. I'm going to put her in the average tier because that's where I think she is. But I do think there's a chance that she goes up. Set. This one's going to be another probably semi-bold take, because he did just get that massive, absolutely massive buff to his 3. I think his build right now is perfectly fine too. And he flexes to solo lane, to jungle. I see a world where Set is going to be very valuable. He's going to be very strong. Flex potential is massive. He's going to be playing both solo and jungle. So I'm excited for Set. I'm excited to see where he is. I'm excited to see where he's played and what team is built with him. Scotty will put in C tier. She has a good matchup into Uller, and that's like all of her strength. Her build right now is good, but she just sucks. Sobek, pretty average support. He does what you need him to do. He plucks, then he he's pretty hard to deal with in the early game, but mid game, you kind of just CC him and kill him unless he's ahead. Late game, you CC, you kill him, he's dead. His build right now is fine, but I don't think he does anything spectacularly. Soul, definitely better than Chronos. I can give her that. She builds Mannequin and she wins laning phase if she does that. I don't think her build is fantastic. The rings aren't great right now. Bancroft's, maybe you see a build with Bancroft's Claw and the Typhons come out and she flies up the board. But currently, I don't think she's very good. She maybe just sees some counter picks or some picks into Olorun because she just lives versus Olorun. Wukong. I think Wukong is in a pretty bad spot. I guess build right now is not very good. He doesn't lane very well. It's hard for him to get to the late game. Even when he gets to the late game, he's pretty easy to deal with. I think Wukong is struggling a little bit right now. I don't see an entire reason to pick him. He's safe, but like a lot of solo laners are pretty safe right now. I'm not a big Wukong fan. Susano. I think Susano is more of a counter pick jungle. His build right now is actually really good, but he has some matchups that just make it so he can't really do anything, and he's just pretty irrelevant. I think he does have really good counter picks, gods that if they're played, he will be picked and he will just dominate them. He has some flex potential in the mid lane because of Pegon. Maybe some other players pick him in mid. I think he's pretty whatever, pretty average. Sylvanas just comes down to how valuable Manticore and Fabless Hoops end up being. Sylvanas is really good now. He's going to be really good in the laning phase. He's going to be really good in the mid game, and he's going to be really good in the late game if he's even or ahead. If he falls behind, he is just fodder for the enemy team. It's just been Sylvanas through his entire lifespan. He is good if he's ahead. He's bad if he's behind. I see him as a pretty average god. He has gods you don't want to play him into. If they pick Sobek and you pick Sylvanas, you're throwing the game. But he does have some good matchups into Geb, into Yemoja, stuff like that. Terra. I think Terra's going to be one of the better supports we're going to see. I think Terra is going to be in a very good spot. She scales well. She's good in the laning phase. Her utility is now through the roof with how many autos her 3 can block. 5 autos now means something you can dance around, or dance around for 4 autos and then dash through it for some CC. I think she's in a very good spot. I would expect her to see a lot of picks, maybe some flex potential into solo lane, because late game, if you get a hybrid build, Terra, she can just blink ult and get a lot of damage off. Thanatos. I don't really see Thanatos getting picked. I think a lot of assassins are just less risky than him. They just do more than him. If Thanatos gets fed, gets ahead, he can kind of carry a game. But teams aren't really susceptible to that anymore. Teams play a lot smarter. If Thanatos is in your side of the map, you kind of back up. If we get to the mid game, we'll just one-shot him. He'll be pretty useless. Morgan, another one of the best mages in the game. Very, very good. Farms well. She gets to the late game well. Her build right now is really good. Nice poly buff for her, even though I don't think it did that much to her. It just showed up people that poly is an item. She turns into the OP gods if you have double Dodgy, double Kabrakan, double Eset, double Hunbots, just about double any of the top tier gods. You kind of just are very, very hard to deal with. Morgan is in a very good spot. Thor. I don't really want to touch on him too much because I just think he's in a pretty bad spot. I think sometimes he might get picked, but I think a lot of times that you do pick him, there's just better gods, and I think people just kind of want to play him or they just fall back to him, and I think it's a bad habit because I think Thor's in a very, very bad spot. Thoth. Thoth saw a nice buff, and I think that means Thoth is coming back. I don't think the last buff even killed him that much. I think it just made it so it showed other gods are still good picks and that you can look at them. His build right now is pretty good. The buff to his passive makes it so he gets the flat pen faster, and he's just always a god that mid laners like to play. Tyr. I think Tyr's more of a comfort pick. I don't think he's in a great spot, really. I think Deathwalker had a performance on him, and I think people kind of opened their eyes to like, okay, Tyr isn't absolutely useless. But he falls off very hard late game. He's kind of somebody where you get to the mid game, you get a couple items on, and then you rotate to just be a menace. And he does that very well. But he's very exploitable. He gets outdone by a lot of the other warriors, a lot of the other solo laners. But I still think you'll probably see a couple tier picks from some players that just want to play him. Uller. Even though Uller's seen a billion nerfs, he's still going to get played. People like playing him. He's a solo flex. He's an ADC flex. He wins some laning phases, and then his items are absolutely OP if you get to the late game. But it is a lot harder to get to the late game because of his current nerfs. I still see him as an average god. I still see Panda Cat playing him, Solo or Troll, maybe Haddock, stuff like that. Uller is in a fine spot. Vamana. Vamana is still a super weird character. He's not fantastic. He's not terrible. If he gets ahead, he dominates. If he falls behind, he's kind of useless. If you get to late game and you onk him and focus him, he dies. I think he's a pretty average god. He has some picks that he's really good into. He has some picks that he's not great into. We're going to stick him in B and we're going to be happy with it. And I don't think he's going to be played in solo. I don't think anyone will play him in solo. Vulcan, bad. Other mages just do what he does better. His build right now is not fantastic. It's pretty average. Overall, just a pretty meh god. X-Ball. I actually think X-Ball is in a really, really good spot right now. And I think he'll be coming out for a fall split. I think he'll be coming out for Worlds. He has really good matchups. He scales well into the late game. He farms well. He pokes well. Everything about him is being pretty good. I don't see a world where X-Ball isn't played at all. I think he'll be played a good amount, but maybe some of these other gods are just let through every game and you just see a lot of them. Xingchen. Xingchen is kind of moving up and down the tier list. I think currently he is a pretty good god. He has some good counter matchups. He lives the laning phase. He scales well into the late game. His build right now is very good. He has a couple things that don't make him great, but I think overall he's still in a very good spot for supports. And maybe he flexes over into solo lane, but I doubt it. Yamoja, probably one of the best smite gods we've seen over the past 4 years. She is finally not an S tier god. I think she's finally been knocked down a peg. Still towards the top end of A tier, but I think she's still exploitable. She does some things really weak right now, but if you get her to the mid game, you get her to the late game, you give her a good 2v2, she still dominates. Yamoja's still very good. Ymir, same thing as Yamoja. He's kind of been one of those top tier supports recently. Very good with Khepri, very good with Yamoja, very good with Xingchen, Iset. He's one of the best late game supports because of how long his wall lasts and how good his wall is. And then his passive is also very good, reducing damage. Zeus. I don't think we'll see many Zeuses. I think Zeus is just outdone by other gods. His build right now isn't great. His nerfs have kind of been a little tough on him. I think he's not great early game. He scales well into the late game, but that means you have to live in the entire early and mid game, and you can kind of just kill the Zeus if you're an assassin. Zhong. I'm excited to see where Zhong is played, because I think he's got a couple builds that can work really well with him. I think he plays 2 roles pretty well. I really have no idea where he will be picked, where he will be played. I can see him getting picked. I can see him getting not picked at all. I don't really see him reaching to that top echelon of mages with Merlin, Morrigan, stuff like that. But I think he has a chance of being into like the more top B tier, lower A tier type gods. But I'm not entirely sure where we're going to see Zhong. Suki, another pretty average assassin. He's pretty good into some matchups. He's pretty bad into some matchups. You're kind of picking him as a counter pick. His build right now is very good. Yeah, he's a pretty average god. Gilgamesh. I think Gilga's dead. Actually, I can't put him in dead because I think the Najah Serket build where Glad Shield, Manticore, stuff like that is built, I think maybe that pulls him out and becomes a pretty decent character. But I think Gilgamesh is pretty much dead, and I think even that build he's not very good with. MLF. I think MLF is a pretty average mid laner. She doesn't really reach this top echelon of mid laners. Her build right now is fine, but I think she's a little bit exploitable to ganks. She farms well. Her late game is pretty good. It's not that great compared to most mages. Her 2v2 is fine. Overall, pretty average character. Tiamat. I think Tiamat has a problem of being just bad early game, while most other mages are just average early game, or at least manageable. Tiamat scales in the late game better than most other mages, but to get there, her early game is absolutely atrocious. She can't farm anything. She can't clear waves. She needs help doing everything. She is not good. But if she gets to late game, she has Warlock, she has Mirrodin. She's absolutely fantastic, and you should play her. Atlas, one of the better supports currently. I think he's not in this top tier of the supports. I think he's in the next tier, but I think he's better than Bacchus. I think he's better than Fafnir. I think he's better than a lot of the other supports. So I am going to put him in A tier. His build right now is good. He farms well. His 2v2 is good. He team fights well. Overall, I think he's in a good spot, and I think we're going to see him played. I think Charybdis is bad. I think she's only really picked as a matchup, a counter pick to Cupid and do like Ola run. She farms okay. Her ult is terrible. I hate it. It's so bad. Her build right now is fine, but not great. I think she's serviceable, but I don't think she's that good. Yu Huang, another good mage. Another one of those top tier mages. He does a lot of stuff very well. He farms to the late game. If you get to late game Yu Huang, he is absolutely bonkers. He can one-shot backliners, and he can make it so you just win a team fight by yourself. Pegon showed that at the summer bracket finals land thingy, whatever you want to call it. You can hard carry with this god. Cleo. I still think Cleo's in a fine spot. I think the nerfs have taken her down from being OP picked every game. I think now she's finally in a spot where you can play her in solo. You can play her in jungle. She does stuff well. She does what she does well, but you can't expect her to go outside of it. I think the flex potential is what keeps her into a solid spot. Lance. I think Lance is busted still. He is going to need a pretty big shakeup or nerf to him to make it so he's not in this top tier. he just does too much well. He does too much damage. He procs Glide Shield a lot. He procs Manticore. He procs Bluestone. He's hard to deal with if he gets ahead. And if he falls behind, he's still rather useful. I think Lance is an S tier character. And lastly, Shiva. I think Shiva's pretty average. I could see him being played in support and solo. He builds Manticore. He builds Glide Shield. He uses them both very, very well. But I think he doesn't have the Cullen strength, the King Arthur strength, the Lancelot strength. So I don't think he'll reach to that top echelon. But I could see him as a counterpick to some of these other gods. And there it is. This is my opinion of what I think fall split is going to look like, and maybe into worlds if nothing has really changed drastically. Here's, I think, is going to be your top tier. Some of these other gods I talked about, I think could be moved up, but I think these are going to be your 5 best gods going into fall split. There you go. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. Check out the Twitch. Check out the Discord. See ya.